Now we're going to talk about the colors of the wine, and in particular we're going to analyze now the red wine colors. Before we try to analyze the different color schemes of the red wines, I just want to say two things beforehand that can be applied also to white wines, also to rosé wines. The first thing is how we analyze the color. For this you need a white sheet, any simple white sheet that you can find, and you take your glass and try to lean it against this white sheet to have a better understanding of the color of the wine. Because there are so many different levels of colors, there are so many different nuances that can get into play, and for you to have a better understanding, just get a white sheet, take your glass, take your time, and then try to understand the color of the wine. Again, you start with clarity, and this is something that you do like this in the air, because you try to understand how much light goes through the wine. After this, you proceed to understand the color through a white sheet. The second thing I want to tell you, and I guess it's really important throughout the entire course, is about the details. Now we're going to learn about the different red wine colors like purple red, garnet red, ruby red, but it's really not enough to say the color of the wine. You want to give me as many details as possible. You want to give me as many small clues as possible. Remember, you're a detective and you do all this analysis to understand the nature of the wine. So it's not enough to say, this is ruby red. It's not enough to say it's purple red. You can try to ornament this thought. You can say, this is a really intense ruby red. This is a very intense garnet red. This is a very light, weak ruby red. This is a ruby red that presents some garnet tonalities, some garnet red tonalities. And I'm going to talk about this towards the end of this video. So what I try to tell you is that when you give an adjective to tell us the color, try to give as many details as possible about the intensities, about the different tonalities towards which this color approaches. Okay, so when it comes to red wines, we can really think about four colors. The first one is purpley red, the purple red, which is very deep, which is very energetic, which is really young. Then you can think about the ruby red, ruby as in those diamonds. When I think about the ruby red, I also like to think about sour cherry. For some people it's easier to characterize using this example, but it's called ruby red. Then we have granato in Italian. In English you can say it's garnet red, garnet. And you can think about the London bricks. Okay, this is what I really have in my mind to think about the garnet red. You can have the blood as an example, the blood of people, it's garnet. Or melograno, the pomegranate has some sort of garnet red in it. And the last stage to characterize the colors of the red wine is this orangey, it's this browny red. It's really easy to characterize this because it's as if it's another color from the other ones. So orange red, the browny red, it's the top level of the colors. Why do we even talk about the colors of the wine in the first place? Why do we have to characterize, oh, this wine is ruby red, the other one is garnet red? Why do we need this piece of information? Because they give us important clues about the nature, about the age, about the status, about the state of the wine. Okay, so let's get started with the purpley red. The purpley red makes you understand that it's a fragrant wine, it's a very young wine. Okay, maybe it's been just produced this year. You should think about the youth. You should think about the juvenile nature of the wine. It's a new wine. It's a fresh wine. You should think about a wine that's fresh, that keeps its primary aromas because it's a young wine. In terms of the taste characteristics, we should expect a wine that's high in acidity because it's just been produced. It's not been, stabled yet 100%. It keeps this high acidity. It keeps this young energy with it. That's what a purple red observation makes us think. You see, it's not just about telling the color. After you tell the color, you should understand the mechanism behind it. After you tell us the color, it's important for you to understand what it may potentially indicate. It doesn't indicate these things 100%, but it gives you a first clue. It gives you a first push. Okay, I see a color that's purpley red, deep, intense. This makes me think that this wine is very young. It keeps its freshness. It's maybe characterized more by the primary aromas. It has high acidity. Rosso Rubino, the ruby red, is mostly found in most of the wines that we're going to taste throughout in our lives. It is a very frequent observation. I should not be telling you this, but if you're not really sure about what color to say for red wines, use ruby red, okay? It is a very common color you're going to encounter in most of the wines. These wines, they tend to be young. And in terms of the taste components, they tend to be in a good equilibrium. They tend to be in a good balance. The harshness and the smoothness. So acidity, maybe it's not going to be as harsh. Maybe it's in a good balance with the other smooth components that make up the taste of the wine. And as I said, the Ruby Red doesn't give us a particular idea about the aging of the wine. It's very frequent. They tend to be young and fresh, also these wines. Less so than the purpley red wines. But these are most of the wines that we're going to drink in our life. Then comes the Granato, and it shows some sort of maturation. If you observe this opening, let's say the opening of the color, because in red wines most people think that the intense, the dark color shows the aging of the wine, but it's the inverse. If you observe this Granato, which is a level, let's say luminous, more luminous than the Ruby Red, it's a little bit weaker. For example, Nebbiolo always has this color. By the way, between parentheses, the color doesn't only depend on these factors that I talk about. It really gives us information about the aging and the maturation and the state of the wine. But sometimes it's something that can be inherited directly from the typology of the grape, like Nebbiolo. Hardly you're gonna find a Nebbiolo that has Ruby Red. It always has Granato. If you drink a Barolo, Barbaresco, even a Nebbiolo that's young, it's gonna be Granato. Between parentheses, keep this piece of information in your mind. But Granato, as a rule of thumb, in general, indicates a level of maturation. We're not with young wines, 100%. These wines that we're going to taste show some sort of maturation. They've been put in barrique a few years. Also, maybe they've been aged in steel, but some years have passed. So the color started to evolve from ruby red to granny red. And what does it tell us? It tells us that maybe this passage from the primary, the secondary aromas to tertiary aromas have started to happen. On the olfactory level, I'm not going to expect fresh fruits. I'm not going to expect at least only fruit aromas, but I'm going to expect something that indicates some sort of maturation. Like, you know, the spicy tones like vanilla or something toasty. Like, I'm going to have all these ideas in my mind. I'm not getting into details now because we're going to talk about these ideas when we delve into the world of the olfactory dimensions. But you have to expect some sort of maturation in terms of the aromas that you perceive in your nose, and in terms of the taste, maybe the acidity, the harshness has been smoothened, and we're gonna have more smoothness than in this wine. And finally, in those big wines that have been matured for a long time, you're gonna observe that the color is browny, it's orangey red. And in these wines, of course, you're gonna expect deepness, you're gonna expect lots of smoothness, morbidezza. You want your, mouth to be caressed by these wines. You want the opulence. You want the structure, the weight. These are your expectations. You want the tertiary aromas that are very interesting. You want the complexity in the olfactory spectrum. These are the things, these are the ideas that need to be created in your mind once you make this first observation. Before we finish this video, I want to talk about something very important. Again, this comes back to the question of giving details about the colors. It's not science. We try to be as accurate, as artsy as possible. Let's say that you analyze a wine and it's ruby red, okay? But it's not 100% ruby red, because on the surface, in this last line of the glass, you start observing some garnet red, some observation, granato. There is some change that you start observing. And in wine terms, it's reflections. So maybe you have in your hand a ruby red wine with some garnet reflections, tonalities, nuances. These are the words with which you need to get familiar. So it's not science. It's ruby red, okay. The wholeness of the wine, the complete wine, the entire wine gives you the idea of ruby red. But really in the surface, you start observing some garnet red. Then you just have to say it. You say it's a wine with ruby red color with garnet red reflections, This case is different from a wine that has vividly ruby red color. My expectations are going to change, and you need to tell us whatever you observe in the glass. Keep this thought in your mind, give us details, and I guess these ideas are going to be very stable in your mind once we analyze also the white wines. Let's go to the color of the white wines.